on overnight.
I believe in reason and common sense.
Leith Van Onselen from Macro Business with the Treasury of Common Sense.
Common sense never goes out of style.
Yes, here we are on a Thursday morning with Leith Van Onselen, macrobusiness.com.au. How are you, my friend?
Yeah, I'm great, Luke. How about yourself?
I'm travelling well, thank you, Leith. Good to talk to you again. And we had some good news on the inflation front yesterday. Were you surprised?
Oh, mate, I think everyone was surprised, actually. So the ABS released their October CPI inflation indicators. That's sort of their monthly read on inflation. And it actually fell. So prices fell 0.3% in October to be 4.9% higher year on year. Now, that basically beat all economists' expectations. They were expecting, positive inflation print about 5.2% year on year, and it's even lower than what the RBA's own projections are. So it was a really good result, and it was driven by really a sharp fall in imported goods inflation. So basically, Australia's inflation at the start of this whole high inflation episode was driven by imports. So it was all the imported. We had supply chain problems all around the world, and that basically pushed up the price of everything. Yeah. And that's what drove our inflation initially, and then it's obviously pivoted towards more domestic services-based inflation. So now we're sort of getting the opposite now, where supply chains have all freed up, and we've got basically this global goods deflation going on at the moment. And China's export prices, so for their consumer goods, which is basically what we buy, is actually in deflation, which means that they're falling in price, and that's going to filter through, not just into Australia, but probably right across the world. And what it basically means is that we're going to have this sort of negative, a tailwind, basically, dampening inflation, both here and globally, and that's really good news. So what it should do, it should mean that it's a bit easier for the RBA to meet their inflation targets, and hopefully will mean that that the last rate hike might have been the last one. I can't see any chance at all of them raising rates next week, which is the last one of the year, and the next time they meet's in February. So hopefully, if this continues, we might be done with rate hikes, which would be fantastic. And in fact, CBA, their economics team actually predicted that the monthly CPI indicator will print with a 3 in front of it by December, which nobody was expecting even a week ago.
Wow.
So, that'd be fantastic news. And hopefully it means that the end of this, 3-year nightmare is coming to an end.
What about the things that we've often spoken about, rent, for example, and the cost of that, and fuel? I think fuel's coming off a little, but what about in the real estate sector?
Yeah, actually, rents fell this month. Now, it's a bit of statistical trickery. So rents actually fell by 0.4% in October. But that was driven by the federal government introduced these rental subsidies, so for low income households, and without those, rents would have risen by 0.7%. So we had this 1 month fall in rents caused by subsidies. The other good news though is construction costs, which is another. So basically, housing drives about 1/4 of the inflation. So that accounts for about 1/4 of the inflation basket. So that's rents and the cost to build new homes and all that sort of thing. And the cost to build new homes has been falling for the past year pretty much, but now it's starting to fall quite heavily. So that's good news, and that sort of relates also to this imported goods inflation. So a lot of the building materials that go into building a house are imported, and they're all starting to fall as these, or at least come back because of all these supply chains are freeing up. So we've got some good news there as well. The rents will probably keep rising going forward because we've got this strong population growth, but there are at least some offsets. So yeah, there's at least some good news. Anything that comes in on a boat is basically getting cheaper, and that's helping to sort of dampen overall inflation.
And I guess we've got to rely on retailers and other suppliers to pass those cost reductions on, don't we? Aren't we a bit reliant on that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So we've got these sort of these tailwinds coming in, which is going to help it. And yes, we do rely on that. But and obviously demand's still pretty strong, not because households are spending a lot, because we're not. We're actually cutting back on expenditure on average. But obviously we've got more households coming in because we're running this huge immigration program, which is obviously bolstering consumption, spending, all those sorts of things. But that being said, this week we got retail sales data for October, and actually retail sales have only grown by 1.2% over the past year, and that's obviously way less than inflation, which is close to 5%, and obviously less than population growth, which is about 2.5%. So once you take those things out, households are actually cutting back very heavily on their spending if you adjust it for population growth and inflation. And in fact, it was the slowest annual rate of growth since November 2010 outside of the pandemic. So definitely, households are cutting back. We're just adding more households, which is sort of offsetting those cutbacks, unfortunately.
What about the RBA Governor, Michelle Bullock, who's had a bit to say over the last week? I think she had a crack at dentists and hairdressers. How do you think she's handling the role? And is it time now for us to say, the RBA's got this right, or is that not right?
Yeah, look, I'm not a fan of her commentary in the last week or so. So it seems like she does seem a bit out of touch, and she's been kind of blaming the wrong things. So last week, Michelle Bullock gave a speech where she said that basically Australians are spending too much on dentistry and haircuts, and that those two things are a sign of overconsumption, and that's helping to drive inflation, which is quite frankly ridiculous. I mean, those are effectively essential spending. I mean, does she want us to walk around scruffy and toothless? It's it's a bit ridiculous.
Yes.
And then this week she gave a presentation to a central bankers conference in Tokyo on Tuesday night, when she basically said that household spending and finances are holding up well, and we've also got these really high levels of savings that we built up over the pandemic. But the reality is that individual households aren't holding up well, and we're actually cutting spending. Again, it's this problem of adding so many households, and she's looking at the overall household sector, not which has obviously been juiced by this massive population growth. And we've also got a huge amount of disparity between households. So the CBA, the economics team, released some data last week. It was fantastic. And what actually showed is that retirees are spending like drunken sailors. So they're actually spending at a rate that's far above inflation.
Yeah.
Whereas anyone under 40 is actually cutting back their spending. And the reason for that is obvious. I mean, if you're under 40, you're most likely to have a mortgage or you're renting. So you're getting smashed by mortgage rates, or you're getting smashed by rents. And anyone in between that sort of retiree age and 40 are they're not cutting back, but they're spending less than inflation. So they're effectively cutting back in real terms. And all this tells you, though, is again, if you're paying rent or you're paying a mortgage, you're getting smashed and you're making cutbacks. But the older people above 65 tend to own their homes mortgage free, and they're not renting. And they're actually making out like bandits, because higher interest rates give them greater deposits. They also, the generation that's more likely to own investment homes, and a lot of those are owned outright, so they're making heaps of money, obviously, off rent, and they're spending up. And the problem with it is, I don't begrudge them for spending if they want it, but the problem with it is the RBA is trying to control this demand across the economy, and it's doing it via one tool, which is interest rates, which only impacts about 1/3 of households who have owner-occupier mortgage.
Of course, yeah.
So you're effectively smashing the young people who are making the cutbacks to try and curb demand, which is being pushed by people who are retired mostly, and aren't impacted by those interest rates.
Yeah.
So again, it's this stupid blunt tool that we've got, and what we really need is obviously the federal government, who has a whole bunch of tools to help the RBA out. And the best way to do it is, you can't go and target retirees directly necessarily. It's hard, but they could certainly cut immigration so that we don't keep adding all these spenders to the economy.
Yeah, of course.
And push up demand, and obviously also push up rental inflation, which is which is a major driver of inflation. So we sort of need a circuit breaker from the federal government. But that being said, look, this goods inflation data that's come out today, or the monthly inflation indicator, is at least positive. So hopefully it means that we're not going to get any more rate rises. Famous last words though. But at the same time, we're probably not going to get rate cuts for a fairly long time. So they're going to stay at this high level, and they don't need to stay at that high level. The federal government would help the RBA out.
Yeah. All right. Good to talk as always, mate. Stay well. We'll catch you next week.
Yeah, no worries, Luke. Thanks for that.
Not at all. Thank you. Leith Van Onselen, macrobusiness.com.au.